Chapter 1. The Invisible Shift. Hold on right there and give me a moment of your time. Close out your other windows and lock in, because what we are discussing today goes way beyond typical basketball gossip. This isn't a basic compilation of great plays, nor is it just another standard update on the non-stop media coverage surrounding Caitlin Clark that has overwhelmed women's basketball talk since her debut. What we are actually looking at is a massive, permanent transformation in how a specific team competes. It is a major change that the bulk of sports commentators completely overlooked because they were overly focused on tracking deep three-pointers and on-court trash talk rather than analyzing the core reasons behind the transformation. The real mystery is why Caitlin Clark is suddenly playing with such absolute liberty. How is she managing to post 24 points and 9 assists nightly, aggressively creating her own offense, and wearing down opponents with a level of intensity that her biggest supporters hadn't witnessed on a regular basis before now? Furthermore, why did the Indiana Fever, a franchise that endured 2 straight years of physical bullying and a reputation for being easily intimidated, suddenly perform like an unstoppable force against a Golden State Valkyries roster that arrived in Indiana without a single loss in Western Conference play? I am Dre Fiver with Street Hoops, and the explanation for all of these puzzles comes down to a single individual, Myisha Hines-Allen. Go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comment section below. Let's dive deep into this breakdown to fully grasp what Myisha Hines-Allen accomplished against the Valkyries, and why that specific game carries immense significance for the future of the sport. To see the whole picture, we have to look back at how this all started. Specifically, the harsh and largely ignored reality of what Caitlin Clark actually went through during her initial 2 seasons in the league. The typical box scores simply fail to capture the true reality of those first 2 years. You won't find it by looking at most valuable player discussions, massive television contracts, corporate endorsements, or the sport's booming popularity. The real story is told through the 31 matchups she was forced to sit out. It is told through 4 distinct muscle strains endured by the most prominent athlete in women's hoops. It is told through incidents like Alana Smith's dangerous undercutting violation, alongside numerous flagrant penalties and aggressive collisions that went way past traditional physical defense and turned into something far more calculated and dangerous. The rest of the league recognized early on that they could push boundaries when guarding Clark. They realized they could use excessive force and high-intensity physicality to disrupt her rhythm and exhaust her body over a long season, primarily because no one on the Indiana roster was stepping up to make them regret it. This realization spread like wildfire across the WNBA, and opposing rosters acted on it continuously while the Fever offered no real pushback for 2 consecutive seasons. Consider the mental toll that kind of environment takes on an athlete, especially a scorer of Clark's caliber, whose entire style relies on absolute assurance, fluid movement, and the audacity to launch shots from distances most pros wouldn't dream of attempting. Imagine stepping onto the court every night knowing an opponent might cross the line physically, and no teammate would step in to defend you. It is impossible to unlock your most aggressive, dominant competitive mindset when a portion of your brain is constantly focused on avoiding injury. You simply cannot execute the exact play you want with total conviction when you are secretly anticipating the pain of an opponent trying to send a hostile message. The pinnacle of Caitlin Clark's game relies on mental freedom just as much as physical capability. Yet, for 2 seasons, the way the Fever built their roster stripped away that peace of mind by leaving out the one element every historic offensive star has always required to reach their peak: a powerful, visible defender who commands respect. Clark recognized this gap in her team, which brings us to the part of the Myisha Hines-Allen acquisition that deserves a thorough examination, showcasing Clark's deep understanding of the game and her elite leadership qualities. When Hines-Allen became a free agent during the winter, her reputation in the league was already well established. At 30 years of age, the veteran forward possessed seasons of starting experience with the Dallas Wings, bringing an intense physical presence and a competitive spark capable of boosting the grit of any squad she joined. General manager Amber Cox recognized her value, and head coach Stephanie White understood exactly what she could provide to the lineup. However, the deciding factor that ultimately secured her commitment, and something Hines-Allen openly discussed when explaining her choice to sign with Indiana, wasn't a corporate recruitment presentation, a talk about organizational values, or a pitch regarding media exposure. Instead, it was a direct message that delivered a clear, impactful truth. Caitlin Clark personally wanted her on the team. Clark went directly to management and pointed out the precise missing element she required to play without restraint. She made it clear that she needed this specific athlete's size, drive, and fearlessness to confront opponents whenever the game got out of hand. Heinz Allen, who easily could have sought out a starting position with another organization or focused on maximizing her personal statistics, recognized Clark's request and immediately agreed to join the project without a second thought. This entire process, where a franchise cornerstone spots a major weakness, communicates it straight to management, and the front office secures the exact solution requested, stands as one of the finest displays of player-guided roster management seen in pro sports. Clark didn't just sit around waiting for management to spot the issue, nor did she simply pray that someone in leadership would notice what the team lacked. She evaluated her environment honestly, targeted the exact problem, and requested the specific veteran by name. The front office made the move, and the battle against the Golden State Valkyries served as the first major return on that decision, playing out in spectacular fashion. Breaking the Valkyries. Let's look closely at how that matchup progressed, because the chronological order of events tells a powerful story. The Valkyries arrived in Indianapolis deploying the exact same brand of physical intimidation that opponents had used against the Fever since Clark's rookie debut. They understood their own limitations. They couldn't keep pace with her rapid decision-making, they couldn't contain her off the bounce for an entire game, and they couldn't consistently challenge her deep three-pointers because no one in the league possesses the length and closing speed to alter her shot once she lets it fly. Consequently, they resorted to the age-old tactic used by less talented teams trying to upset a superior opponent. They brought intense physicality, tested the limits of the officiating, crowded her airspace, and tried to wear her down physically rather than outplaying her mentally. For a portion of the early minutes, it seemed like the identical narrative from past years, with Indiana absorbing the hits and playing hard but failing to retaliate in a way that truly demands respect from the rest of the league. Then, Caitlin Clark decided she had taken enough. She advanced the ball up the court with a slow, calculated tempo that elite guards utilize when they want the defense to believe they are merely resetting the offense. She analyzed the floor, took a few steps forward, and launched a 33-foot deep three with the absolute poise of an athlete who has hit that shot countless times throughout her career. The ball rattled the net perfectly, but instead of running back to play defense, she turned right around to confront her defenders. She voiced her thoughts, blew kisses to the crowd, and made sure Tiffany Hayes and the rest of the Valkyries roster knew precisely who had just scored on them. She wasn't merely running a play, she was destroying the opponent's psychological confidence. She sent a clear message that their entire defensive strategy against her had failed completely, demonstrating just how little she feared their defense. This was the version of Caitlin Clark that had remained suppressed for 2 seasons because a flawed roster structure left her exposed to physical retaliation. This is the result when you remove all limitations. Predictably, the Valkyries responded the way frustrated teams always do when being thoroughly outclassed by an unstoppable star. Their aggression turned into anger, and the tension boiled over. Clark pursued a loose ball and ended up locked in an intense verbal standoff with Janelle Saldon. In past seasons, this scenario would have played out with Clark left entirely on her own or escalating without any support from her teammates. As players from both benches began to move and the atmosphere grew incredibly tense, it was clear a threshold had been reached. Yet, before any Valkyries player could even step toward Caitlin Clark, Myisha Hines Allen was already on the scene at a full sprint. She threw herself directly into the middle of the dispute with a level of focus that proved this was a calculated move rather than an emotional reaction. This was the exact scenario she was brought in to handle. She took up space between Clark and the opposing group, standing tall and projecting a clear message. If you want a piece of her, you have to deal with me first. The Valkyries read the situation correctly and chose to retreat, displaying classic enforcement technique. This is the exact same dynamic that Draymond Green provided for Stephen Curry for over a decade in San Francisco, and the comparison is remarkably accurate because the structural roles match perfectly. Curry's historic impact on the game always depended on absolute freedom, the freedom to move without ball, curl off screens, and launch shots with total confidence and zero second-guessing. A massive reason why that mental freedom remained sustainable across multiple long seasons and deep championship runs was the underlying assurance that Draymond Green was sharing the floor with him. It wasn't about Green starting fights or hurting his team by getting thrown out of critical games. It was about the fact that every athlete in basketball knew that pushing Curry past the rules meant answering to a teammate who would gladly escalate the situation in response. That definitive threat altered how opponents played defense, changing their calculations and allowing Curry to direct his complete focus toward basketball instead of worrying about physical retaliation. Heinz Allen is now providing that identical peace of mind for Clark. She proved it against the Valkyries, and she didn't just stop with the Saldon incident. When tensions flared once more in the second half during a dispute between Clark and Kayla Thornton, Heinz Allen was immediately in position. Every single time a conflict bubbled up, she was already right there, almost as if she possessed a map charting where every argument would erupt before it even started. It looked as though she had analyzed the Valkyries' tendencies, noted every potential flashpoint, and positioned herself to counter them. That doesn't happen by chance. It happens when an athlete joins a team with a clear purpose, honored by the trust of the franchise star, and treats that responsibility with total commitment. Chapter 6. Beyond the Enforcer Role. With that said, I want to make sure we look at the complete picture of Myisha Heinz Allen as a basketball player, because focusing strictly on her role as a bodyguard risks oversimplifying her talents into a single dimension. She is far more than just a physical presence. When Aaliyah Boston was sidelined earlier in the schedule and Heinz Allen stepped into the opening group against the Seattle Storm, she put together an excellent performance rooted entirely in basketball intelligence. In 27 minutes of action, she chipped in 8 points, pulled down 6 rebounds, handed out 4 assists, and registered a plus 16 rating during her time on the floor. For an athlete who accepted a backup role primarily because the face of the team wanted her there, those statistics highlight her well-rounded capabilities. Head coach Stephanie White has frequently praised Heinz Allen's basketball mind, highlighting her skill in finding open looks, executing effective pick-and-roll plays alongside Clark and Kelsey Mitchell, and making smart passes from the high post to set up her teammates. She possesses excellent court vision from the elbow and runs the exact same offensive sets that Boston executes, keeping the team system running smoothly whenever she is on the hardwood. She isn't a liability that a coach has to hide with strategic substitutions. She is an intelligent, highly effective player who simply happens to be completely ready to take on an entire roster if they try to intimidate Caitlin Clark. Finding that mix of skills is incredibly tough, and while teams often settle for a lesser version during the offseason, Indiana secured the ideal option. We also need to mention the impact of Sophie Cunningham here, as it provides crucial context for the protective identity the Fever are building around Clark. When Cunningham delivered her breakout physical defense on Clark's behalf last year, the online sports community reacted instantly and on a massive scale. She gained an incredibly large following almost overnight, for a very clear reason. The Indiana fanbase and the basketball world at large were desperate to see someone support Clark. Fans weren't merely applauding a gritty defensive play. They were cheering the first real sign that someone on the roster was ready to embrace physical contact and draw a line in the sand. They were feeding off the energy of a teammate declaring that bullying wouldn't be tolerated on her watch. That desire for protection had been building for an entire year, and when Cunningham delivered, the massive response showed just how necessary it was. Now, imagine that collective energy amplified across the floor. Cunningham patrolling the outside lines while Heinz Allen controls the interior. Imagine Clark orchestrating the offense behind a wall of dedicated protection coming from 2 completely different areas of the court at the same time. That isn't just a minor improvement. It alters the complete nature of the team, entirely shifting the risk assessment for any defender thinking about using excessive physical force against number 22. The statistics completely back up what we are seeing on the floor. Clark is currently maintaining averages of 24 points and 9 assists per game, and she logged 22 points and 9 assists in this particular win over a Valkyries team that arrived undefeated against Western Conference opponents. She is looking for her shot with an intensity and assurance that feels entirely different from her first 2 years in the league. She is engaging in trash talk, interacting with the crowd, and competing with the fierce energy of an athlete who has finally been allowed to play without restraint. When you analyze the adjustments made over the winter, the specific teammates she requested, the security that veteran offers, and the mental freedom that protection provides, the production makes perfect sense. Clark isn't suddenly shooting at a higher percentage because of a mechanical adjustment. She is shooting better because her mind is clear. The mental energy she previously spent worrying about incoming physical hits has been completely recovered and poured right into reading defenses, executing plays in real time, and channeling the competitive drive that makes her deep three-pointers feel incredibly demoralizing to opponents. Mental freedom acts as a massive performance booster for a special talent like Clark, and now that the Fever have provided it, the rest of the league is beginning to realize the consequences. Indiana currently holds a 4-2 record, having just ended the perfect run of a top-tier Western Conference opponent on their home court. With Sophie Cunningham handling the perimeter, Myisha Hines-Allen locking down the interior, and Caitlin Clark playing with the total peace of mind of a star who no longer needs to worry about blindside hits, the competitive nature of this entire organization has completely transformed. This shift didn't occur because of a lottery pick, a massive trade deal, or a brand new offensive strategy. It occurred because the team's cornerstone looked at her situation with complete honesty, pinpointed exactly what she required to excel, shared that need with leadership, and management brought in the exact answer she wanted. That is how a franchise player leads, and that is the kind of organizational chemistry that builds a championship culture. Myisha Hines-Allen, the 30-year-old veteran who accepted a backup contract to join this group, whose signing barely made a ripple in mainstream sports news, and who came to town because Caitlin Clark wanted her there, is the foundational piece making it all work. Chapter 8. A New Competitive Reality. Let's look at the bigger picture of what this Fever squad is creating, because the balance of power within the WNBA is about to shift in ways that rival teams aren't prepared to handle. For 2 consecutive seasons, opponents utilized a reliable blueprint to slow down Indiana. Use extreme physicality on Clark, set an aggressive tone early, disrupt her comfort level, and force her to focus on surviving contact rather than breaking down defenses. Opposing teams accepted giving up occasional baskets because they knew that over 40 minutes, the physical toll would eventually damage her shooting percentages, land her on the injury report, or both. That blueprint was highly effective, forcing Clark into the training room 31 times over 2 years, costing her games, and capping the team's overall potential. However, that strategy is officially dead. It isn't just slightly less useful. It is completely broken, because Myisha Hines-Allen demonstrated to the basketball world against the Valkyries that there is now a real price to pay. There is now an athlete on the Indiana roster who will confront you the moment you think about crossing the line. The second a defensive strategy stops working, opposing coaching staffs are forced to start completely over from scratch. They must now discover an entirely different method to slow down a star player who, when granted complete mental peace and physical security, stands as perhaps the most unstoppable scorer the women's game has ever seen. The era of the Indiana Fever being viewed as a soft team isn't slowly fading away. It ended permanently on that floor against the Golden State Valkyries the exact moment Myisha Hines-Allen stood her ground, looked the opponent in the eye, and watched them back down. The security system is fully operational, the deterrent is active, and the greatest offensive talent in modern women's basketball is finally playing with the absolute liberty she earned from the very start. Whether rival teams want to admit it or not, they have a massive problem on their hands. Alright, Street Hoops family, you know exactly what to do next. If this breakdown resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button immediately. Share your honest, unfiltered opinions in the comments section below. Is Myisha Hines-Allen the absolute most vital and undervalued free agent addition in the WNBA this year? Is the protection she offers the true catalyst for Caitlin Clark's current historic run of success? Is the reputation of the Fever being soft officially a thing of the past? I want to see all of your basketball takes down below with zero filters. If you haven't subscribed to Street Hoops yet, you are missing out on daily analysis, and today is the perfect day to fix that. Click subscribe right now, turn on your alerts, because the Indiana Fever are playing with a purpose, and we are going to cover every single step of the journey. This is Dre Fiver with Street Hoops.